You are listening to The Call-In, a series of conversations recorded by ARRAY with filmmakers of color and women of all kinds to discuss feature, narrative, and documentary work. This conversation with ARRAY releasing filmmakers, Tyrone Tommy, the director of Learn to Swim, and Iliana Sosa, the director of What We Leave Behind, was recorded on October 19th, 2022. Both films are now streaming on Netflix.
Hi, my name is Tyrone Tommy, the writer and director of Learn to Swim. We are here on ARRAY's The Call-In with our newest filmmaker, Iliana Sosa, and her film What We Leave Behind. How you doing, Iliana?
I'm doing great. How's it going? So nice to meet you.
How's it been? You debuted at South by of this year, correct?
Yeah, so I we had our world premiere at South by, and this was in March, and since then we've been playing all over the country. And yeah, it's been pretty wild ride, I have to say, especially, during the pandemic where, so many of us weren't used to seeing so many people.
Mhm.
And then having a world premiere with a live audience, and then just having audience Q&As has been really, really rewarding and really great. And now that the film is widely available on Netflix, that's even more amazing. So I feel really grateful and just honored to be here and part of this family too. And I'm excited to talk to you also about your beautiful film.
Oh, thank you. No, I loved What We Leave Behind. It was such a great film, such a beautiful portrait of your grandfather. Um, was it was it always the plan to have it debut as a whole? I don't know how geographically where El Paso is or compared to Austin, but was it always sort of a plan to have it be a sort of a hometown debut and to have it be viewed locally?
Well, so yeah, part of the film takes place in El Paso, and that's where I'm from. And it's so just to give you some context, El Paso is far west Texas, and Austin's more central, and it's like a 9-hour drive
Mm,
to go between
okay.
both cities. So yeah, it's a long
It's a little
long
jump, yeah.
drive. It's a little jump. And but we had first submitted, Sundance was one of our funders, and we were really hoping to get into Sundance. We didn't get into Sundance, and then thought, well, that's fine. It was a bit of a disappointment, but then because of the pandemic, Sundance this year was virtual. So with South by, it actually really felt like a wonderful place for it because I'm based now in Austin, but being here in Texas and my community being here in Texas is it's just awesome to have a hometown in that sense premiere, right? And be able to invite friends and family. And my family was actually able to come, which is way more accessible than going to Park City. So, that was really awesome to have them here. But it was actually not our intention, but it was great that it happened in the way that it did. And I think it needed to happen in that way. And so, just feel really, uh, yeah, it was just a real experience.
You've made a bunch of documentaries before. Like, this is not is this your first feature documentary?
Yeah, this is my first feature documentary. I've made short docs before, and
Hmm.
I made straight out of film school. It was more of a work for hire, very very low budget, micro budget fiction feature that I didn't write. But this is really like my first. I feel like my first like really feature debut because I feel really strongly about like my voice in it. I feel like this is my voice. So but this is, yeah, the first sort of dive into documentary in this way, and I feel like I learned the art and like the craft of making a documentary film by making this film, which took 7 years to make.
Mm.
And so, I feel like, it was a learning lesson in so many ways. And by the end of it, I was very comfortable with, how to shoot something, but also very close to my grandfather. It took me some time to develop this common language with him, even though I'm fluent in Spanish. He speaks a very specific way, and at times I didn't always understand him. So there was very early on interviews with him where I was moving the camera a lot, or I was impatient with the questions or patient with his answers, and you could tell that. So by the time the years went by, we had developed this common, just, we were very used to each other by, by the time, I had filmed so much. So that really helped.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you say that, talking about, because one of the things I wanted to know was how long of a period were that you were shooting this for, and when you decided to make this film, because it feels like it feels like a film that takes place over the course of like 2 weeks or almost like a month. It feels so tight and like condensed as far as like the cohesion of the story and the visuals. But then it was also interesting hearing you say about the speaking Spanish, because ever so often you would be speaking to him in Spanish, and then you would hear someone like off screen like translate what you were saying in Spanish to him, or like almost like repeat it, because he wasn't like so much like getting what you were saying sometimes. And I was like, what? I'm like, they're both speaking Spanish now.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I mean, I definitely understand, I'm fluent but yes, my mom actually was a huge process it. I mean, she was just amazing in all of this because there'd be times in the edit where we'd be editing and he'd say something and I'm like, I'm not sure what he's saying. And she was like she was a translator in that sense in some of those scenes. But yeah, it took a while, and I think, and it's interesting you say that about it. I'm actually, thank you for that, because I watch the film and I feel it's done over so many years, and I didn't shoot every year, and I used different cameras. I shot a lot of it, but then also I had two DPs, Judy Fu and
Mm,
Monica Wise, at different times in the film. And so it's interesting that you felt like it was cohesive, but I think we really discovered in the edit the story, the heart of the story we found later. Like my original intention wasn't like I'm gonna go and film him and he's gonna make this house. That came way later. Like at one, I had a very different version of this film, and worked with a previous editor, and I knew that's not the version of the film I wanted to make. And so once I started collaborating with Isidore Bethel, who's my editor, he was just so awesome to work with. And I sent him a rough cut of that previous film, and it was more of maybe your standard documentary, something you'd see more on PBS, right? Like more interviews
mm.
and I knew that's not what I wanted to make. And he sent me back like 8 pages of notes. I mean, literally an email, all these notes. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, I want to work with you. You get it. You get what I'm trying to do. And then the challenge was like, okay, well, send me footage that you love, send me footage that maybe irks you, send me footage that bothers you. It was a very interesting collaboration process with him. But I then decided to go actually film my grandfather filming or building the house. That wasn't, my original intention, but he just started it. And I went, and then that's where the film took us, right? And so it's just interesting with documentary because you really don't know what you're going to end up really crafting it. It really all happens in the edit. And my original intention was to document the bus rides, but also just my grandfather's work as abracero. He was a farm worker in the 50s and traveling all over the U.S. and farming. And many of these men who were contracted legally by the U.S. government have passed away, right? This was in the 50s. So I wanted to make sure to just keep that oral history alive in our family. But it really wound up being, the film is, I think, what it wanted to be, in a very strange way. It just happened to become that.
Yeah, so was the original intention like something that was less portraiture, less meditative? It was more of of sort of a speaking on immigration, speaking on that period of time.
Well, that was that was more of the cut I had before, but I always wanted to make
Mm,
what you see now, something more meditative, quiet, um, and explore. Just I love long takes, and just kind of let uh, the protagonists in the film move in the space in the way they want to. And I feel like there were moments like that in this film that we were able to capture that, right? So yeah, it's just an interesting process. And yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you because I felt watching your film and I wanted to see if there was like, was there any improv in there, or did you work like how it felt like in the way you set up certain scenes and Learn to Swim, that the actors kind of had this ability to sort of just move around and be themselves in the space. And I think that's really interesting. And I love to approach doc in that way.
Yeah, no, it was with Learn to Swim. Yeah, there was definitely for myself and Nick Haight, who's my cinematographer on the film, we would set up these scenes, and for me, it's a lot of just about intention. So we do have the script and they have their lines,
Mhm.
but with the actors that we had, especially the lead actors, Emma Ferrer and Thomas Olajide, they're so smart and they're just such great actors. So we give them any attention, and they would do this scene, and then we would just find the place that we thought was best capturing the truth, the honesty of what it was that they were doing in a moment. And so it felt it wasn't it was there was some improv, but not so much in the lines, but just in the way that they were just exploring each other's
Mhm.
relationships.
Yeah.
And it was great just being able to like capture that essence of what they were doing at any given moment. Because we didn't get to really rehearse it. We shot um, during the pandemic, so we
Oh,
we had a
wow.
table read um, very very early on, and then everything got shut down, and so they never got to rehearse with each other all these scenes. So it was really interesting seeing how all the actors came to developing their characters in their own mind as they were all locked up for months on end. They came with these very,
Wow.
very um, assured versions of themselves, which I thought was just it was really fun to see, and it was really interesting to film.
Well, I mean, that just shows that's really, I did not realize that it was filmed during the pandemic, but the chemistry between both of them is so amazing. So, I mean, wow, that's really incredible that you were able to just figure out that intimacy, like, or craft the scenes in those ways, even if you didn't have rehearsal, but it really shows on screen, like they're just chemistry and just, yeah, they're great together. So, yeah,
Oh,
huge
thank you. Yeah.
congrats on that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, it's been a wonderful journey, and with Emma, you know with her character, she identified, she's Latinx, she's Dominican, Afro
Hmm.
Latina, and when we wrote the character of Selma, um her character, we had written her, she was based on someone in my life who's Latinx, but we when we casted Emma, we took on the elements of her personally. So the Dominican to her became part of
Okay.
who Selma was. And we adjusted the script and adjusted the story in that way. Um, and so it was really interesting, even though the script isn't necessarily about her being Latin, being able to explore the different elements of that, and like where she comes from, and bringing that into the space, and her talking about her history, and who she is and how she came to be where she is. Um, when in your film, or in your work in general, do you feel like a lot of it is you trying to either discover or trying to express that element of yourself, or is it just something you feel that just comes naturally into the work, like everything, or your work is just Latinx because you are Latinx?
That's a great question. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I mean, naturally, with what we leave behind, I mean, that's my family. It's, that's such an important component of my identity. I'm very close to my family, especially my mother's side of the family, which is my maternal grandfather. I was very, close to him, and the film really allowed me to get really close to him. And naturally, like, I think it's been interesting talking to people because they say, oh, the film has a lot of immigration elements, or, it's has all these different issues that people identify with Latinx identity and the border. And while I think that is true, there are those themes. I also am really, I want to be careful and say that, there's so many families that are living this reality, like my family, that are American families that happen to have, family in Mexico or other countries. And these sort of transnational families is something that's not new and not a new concept, right? And so rather than just putting, I feel like pigeonholing the film and saying it's only Latinx, while it has those themes, and my identity is in very many ways tied to, um, the border and to my family. I also want to open it up and know that there's so many other families dealing with this. And what's been really beautiful about the film is to see that it's not only reaching Latinx audiences, but a lot of very different people, right? From all sorts of races and classes, and sending me messages of how this reminded them of, you know, other family, like their Jewish grandmother, for example. Or so it's been nice to see, like, I think our stories are, you know, although they are very specific, they're also, and I don't like saying the word universal, but you know what I mean? Like they're specific, but also they have broader reach. And for me, I think naturally my identity is, it's hard to not make a film that hasn't, that you're not in it, right, in some form or another. And I want to ask you the same question. Like, do you feel with your film, what elements of yourself, of your identity are there? You know, I think inherently art is personal and also political. Just the fact of making something, I think, is very political. And so I identify as, you know, Mexican American and Latina from the frontera, but I've adopted this word recently, and I like to say it's called nepantla, which is a Nahuatl word, which means the in-betweenness. A lot of like
Mm,
people of color live in this in-between liminal space, right? Our identity is here, is there, it's sometimes in between, and so inherently, I feel like that in-betweenness is representative of, you know, what's in my film now. Like I have the privilege of being American and having a US passport, able to cross and, you know, document this with my family. But I have family who's undocumented, and when my grandfather passed away, weren't able to go see him. I was. That was an enormous
mm,
privilege. So I think that it's complicated, and I don't like just to say it is a Latinx film, and it is. But also, I want to say that our stories, although they're specific, they're also just a broader representation of humanity, right? And I'm always going to take that identity with me, that sort of in betweenness, that and that I'm really proud of in everything that I do. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, and something that I'm also aware that as, you know, people of color and as filmmakers, you know, we sometimes, I feel like, just get put into a box and say that's all you can make, right? You can only make immigration
yeah,
and Spanish language films and about the border. And
yeah,
I'm like, but I have other interests, and I can, you know, I mean, sure, that's a huge component of who I am and how I grew up, but that's not all encompassing. So yeah, I'm wondering with you, like with your film, like were there certain pieces of yourself and that you, when you watch it, you're like, oh, that reminds me of a time, or I don't know, how do you feel about that? And because I think it's interesting, and I've talked a lot to a lot of filmmakers, friends of mine who, and we talk about this all the time, identity and like what kinds of films do we want to make or be known for, you know?
yeah. It's interesting. I like that term that you used, the in between, because I feel like being being black in Canada is a lot of that, especially here in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm based right now. Most black people, most Latin people that are here are first generation. Our parents all come from the Caribbean or from the islands, or from somewhere else, from South America, and then we're born here. And so, a lot of people keep their language, and a lot of people, it's one of the interesting things, being here in the city. When people ask where you're from, everyone always says what country their parents were born in, because everyone knows what someone means when they say that, as opposed to, um, a lot of black people I find in America, or a lot of black people in, East Coast Canada, in Nova Scotia, they have been here for a few generations. So for them, they're, they're black and they're American, or they're black and they're Nova Scotian. Whereas if you ask a lot of black people on the streets of Toronto where they're from, they'll be like, I'm Nigerian, or I'm Jamaican, or
Mm.
I'm from this place. And so it is that kind of in between, where you have so much of your original culture, but then you're also very much the culture that you've grown up in, being here in Canada, or being in New York, or wherever you're from. And
Yeah.
so for my films, I feel like they definitely start very, very, very intimately. They start very, very personal, and that is very much at the foundation of the films. But after a while, they as we bring in actors, and if you bring in other people, it starts to become this jambalaya of sorts. And it's interesting watching a lot of them now because it feels like I know that I made them, but it almost feels like someone else made them, and I get to experience this story from someone else, and I'm going like, oh wow, that's so interesting. And so you made it, dude. Like that's your it's your story. But yeah, I guess it's for me. I've always wanted to tell stories about people who look like me. I always say people who exist in spaces but are often not seen, you know? And so whether it's, I did a film about being a Marine cadet in small town Ontario, and that was one thing, or being a young black archer, or in this film, the romance between a young black man and a young Latinx woman.
Mhm.
It is really about telling you these stories that I go through and that I've experienced, and then presenting that to the world in my own way. But as you said, like you also, you know, just as you can do that, you could also do a romantic comedy between two white characters if you wanted to. There's nothing stopping you, right? Like I'm sure our culture would color that in some ways, give it a different little flavor, but it's still, you still want to tell those stories, you still want to do those things just as much as you want to do things that have come from your own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think um, it's, I mean, I like what you said, and I think, and it's not so much like, oh, wanting to, you know, direct things that are outside of our communities, but also saying, we can do the horror film or the,
Mm,
action film with, why not with BIPOC characters? Like, sort of pushing the envelope of more of like what it is that people think we can only do. So yeah, it's just I think it's such an interesting turning point too in the industry, and I think there's just a lot of possibilities. And so, I mean, I think that's exciting. Um, but I love what you said about when you watch your film and you're like, wait, who made that? Like, wait, like they kind of take a life of their own, right? The characters and just the film itself. And it's something sort of outside of you, and you're looking back and you're like, wow. So I've had moments like that with my doc, where, especially with my grandfather, I mean, my whole hope was for him to see the film, but of course that didn't happen, right? I
mm,
didn't know I was going to be filming up until he was really sick. And now I see him on the poster, and I see him in these screenings, and we've had some theatrical screenings, and it's been really something that I'm like, oh, this is now taking a life of its own, and he's now in this space that I've never imagined he'd be. And for one, like he never really got to go to the movies ever. So it's been really amazing. And what you're saying too about representation and wanting to put our communities in that space and see faces we don't see. And that's something I take immense pride in this film, is that that's a face like his we don't get to see often, and is often overlooked. And now he exists on film, and for eternity, essentially, right? I mean,
yeah.
once we bring life, these characters we brought them to life, and now they are forever, they're immortal. It's kind of amazing. So it's interesting. I love that you said that, because I have felt that the past few months with the film and the rollout.
And so interesting you say that about like not because that was another thing I thought, like coming back to the cohesion of the piece of, was it something I was thinking to myself, was it something where you knew that your grandfather was sick or that he was going to pass, and you were like, I need to capture this. There felt like there was an urgency to that, in the film of wanting to capture this before he left. Did you feel that, or was there a point where he did get sick and you realized, oh, there is a finite amount of time that I have on this project or with this story?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd never expected to film when he was sick, and at that point I didn't have crew. It was just me. I was, the rosary scene in the film where everyone's gathered around him. I just shot on my cell phone. I had no camera really at the time. I brought like a small, tiny camcorder with me, but not even proper audio. But I knew, I went down with my mother. We got a call that he was not doing well, and so I went, and it was actually a former partner of mine that suggested, you should probably take it. Don't feel like you have to film all those moments, but take it if there is a sense there to film. And I also felt really weird about just that. And I'm like, I just want to be there with him. Like, I don't think, the film is the film, but this is important to be here in this space with him and my mom and my family. But I brought it anyway. And I remember in those moments, I didn't film all of it. I filmed only certain things that I felt um, where I felt okay, appropriate. I guess appropriate's the word, filming in those moments, and also very conscious of him. Um, and I did it, but I never expected to do that, and it wasn't something that I was like, I'm gonna, film up until I didn't. So, um, and with my editor, with Isidore, we were very, very, very careful as to what include, what not to include, and to really show that experience of his decline in a very respectful way, right? Not just to show because to show, right? I think um, so. Yeah, that was an interesting process, and one that I didn't expect. I didn't expect to be filming up until then. And when he did pass, I did not film that. I mean, in the film it's implied, right, that but that wasn't actually the final moments, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And but I mean, I was there, it just didn't
Yeah.
capture that.
But I think and anyone who's been around an elder or someone who's passing, they've heard that breathing before. Um, they've
Yeah.
heard what that sounds like, what that feels like. Um, the family being around praying. You when you were moving with the camera through the house after he passes, just seeing the house in this state of it was getting there, and things have just sort of like stopped. I felt like that
Hmm.
was such a haunting but also beautiful way to show this, that he had passed on. um was it, for me watching it, I felt it was very haunting and beautiful, but like for your family watching it, how was it for them experiencing that in this way,
It's been really surreal. I think for a long time, my family didn't expect I would finish this film. I mean, my grandfather sometimes would joke and say, he's like, when are you going to finish this film? It took a long time, and partly it's funding, but also the time, right? I mean, I wasn't doing this film
Mhm.
full time ever. I was always working or doing other stuff. But my mom, I screened the film for her in our living room before we locked picture. I wanted to make sure that she was okay with everything and the way her father is represented. And she gave me her blessing, and that was great. But it was really, really difficult for her to see it. I remember screening it for her, and she broke down, and I just held her. I didn't know what else to do in that moment. Um, Now it's the sweetest thing. She's telling everybody about it, that it's, on Netflix, and so many people have reached out from the town too, and from Mexico. I'm not sure how they're watching it because it's not available yet there, but it's been beautiful to receive messages
That
from.
VPN.
Yeah, I know, and it's crazy. It's just wild. Like recently, a woman from the town, she had grandparents that lived in the same town as my grandfather, saw the film, lives in San Juan, and emailed me and said, "Oh, please bring the film here. Let's organize a screening." And she went actually to my grandfather's house, to Jorge's house, to say hi and just express how much she loved the film, and she wanted to organize a screening. And I was like, that's really wild. But I love hearing stories like that, right? Because people are really connecting with the film. And my my mom watched it. The South by premiere was really emotional, and but I'm glad she was there for that moment. um does she watch can she watch it again? No, it's hard. She doesn't. And the rest of my family has watched it once, but they're very proud of it, and just sharing it with friends and family, and that feels really great, that they're able to say, go see it here. And I've been just receiving so many beautiful messages from people that I never expected. So that feels really good. But overall, I feel like they just still can't quite believe it that I
Yeah.
finished it and also that it's out in the world. So
Yeah, it's always when you're working on, especially with documentaries, with fiction, I feel like it's very, you write a script, you talk about it, but like, no one actually believes anything's happening until you go to shoot it, but with with
yeah,
documentaries, you're always sort of constantly in that
yeah,
phase. You're just always in production.
yeah, you are. I mean, you're always in production, and you just don't know when you'll finish, really. I mean, of course, there's always, you know, a limit to something, and to say, okay, this is all I'm shooting, but you can always shoot more, and the story can change dramatically in the edit. I mean, just like it did with this film, I had a different version of it, so yeah, it's constantly unfolding and also just changing. It's very fluid. And I think that's something that I really enjoy about it, about documentary. But there's something also beautiful about fiction where you already know, sort of have a roadmap, right? And you're not finding that story in the edit. You already kind of know going in, this is what I'm going to shoot, and this is I mean, of course, things change, right? But at least you have a little bit more of a roadmap, which is, I think, which is great. And yeah, and I guess with your film, what was that script process like? Did you collaborate with anyone, or was it just you writing, or did you already know that these were the characters you really wanted to center the film on, or how did that unfold?
Yeah, the film started as an exercise at this place called the Canadian Film Center. So myself and a
Okay.
woman, Marnie Van Dyke, wrote the screenplay, and she had written the first version, the short version of it. It was based on an idea that I had. We both love jazz music and both had experienced, losing lovers in our past, and it was very meditative, very small short, and we went to go make the feature. Um, the opportunity came up to make a feature, and we had a bunch of ideas, but they were all just very large large scale ideas. And so we're like, oh, what about this intimate short that we did at CFC? So we went ahead and pitched that, and of course the film just like expanded and became this kind of musical piece that it did. But yeah, it was writing with her. It was really interesting because at first it was just Desi in his apartment for the most part, just Desi going through, trying to get away from his band and trying to evade everybody. And after a while after a few drafts, we realized that the only way to really understand what he was going through was to meet the person that he had experienced this with, experienced his trauma with. And so um, once we introduced Selma to the screenplay, then the time jump started happening. We started going between the two different time periods, and you get the two stories that are going at the same time. But for us, it was really finding the narrative structure of both of their stories in the past and the present. And then once we did that, we sort of crisscrossed them and created a sort of fluid moving between time periods pieces that existed. So that was always there in the script. Um,
Oh, awesome.
yeah, and so we built like a lot of the transitions into filming the film, into doing the movie. But then we went to the edit. Bon Ma and Sean Rikus, who were the editors on the film, they usually, the editors present you your assembly.
Yeah.
But when they did their assembly, they also created this kind of Frankenstein cut of the film where they just had mixed mashed everything even more, and sort of presented that at the same time. And of course, as a director, you see it and you're like, what do you guys do? You know,
Yeah.
um,
That's not what I wrote.
yeah, that's not what the script looks like. But um, the great thing about that is that a lot of the elements from that first initial sort of like Frankenstein cut exist in the film now. Because there's always the film that you wanted to shoot, and then there's the film that you did shoot. And once you start editing the film that you did shoot is when like at least for me, is when the process really starts.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear you say, because when I watched your film and I love the editing of it, and I thought, oh, I wonder if this was already in the script or you found that language in the edit. So it's really cool to see or to hear that that intention was always there in the written material. And then also amazing that you trusted your editors, you know, enough to let them play, but also go with some of those ideas because I think sometimes that can be really hard, right? When you're presented with something that's not what you originally, you're like, wait, that is not that's not what I had in my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I'm just always finding that like with every collaborator, there's always this conversation about intention and what it is that you want to say, and then allowing them to, whether it's your cinematographer, your editor, to bring um, their craft and bring their creative energy to the space, knowing the intention that you have. I mean, for yourself with this film, you worked with two other cinematographers as well. Was it
Yeah.
two editors that you worked with?
Well,
And was
so
it
I worked.
were they simultaneous or were different points?
Yeah, I did not work with two editors at the same time. I had worked with a previous editor on the version of the film that I knew that that's not what I wanted to make, and then moved on and then worked with Isidore, who is the
Right.
main editor of the film. But that wasn't happening at the same time. But with my collaborations with Judy and Monica, I first worked with Monica and then later with Judy, never at the same time. So it was always like three of us at the same time in shooting there in the town. So it would just be me, one of the DPs, and our sound recordist, Glenda. So it was always just three at a time, but there was never, um, you know, there was never a point where everyone was there at the same time. And that sort of developed organically. Like I had met Monica in Mexico City at the time when I was living there briefly and met her, and she just was. I really liked her vibe, and also she's always shooting in different places in Latin America, and I knew that this shoot wasn't going to be it was going to be a little bit more difficult, right, and remote. And I felt that she could handle that, and she did wonderfully. And so that was my first collaboration. And then Judy, I've collaborated with from film school on a lot of other stuff, other shorts, and she just happened to be available. And I wanted to try it out and work with her, and that was really great. And we had already sort of developed this common language with each other because we had worked previously. So with her, it was very easy to just bring her in and say, oh, this is what we shot and this is kind of what I want to try. But both times were sort of an experiment of sorts, trying to figure out how do we tell this film? How do we play? And so there was a lot of room for play because it was such a small team and we'd stay a week at a time at my grandfather's place and just, we weren't shooting continuously like 12 hours a day, but we would pick up the camera when we felt there was something there and give it a break when we felt we needed a break, so it was a really nice fluid process and one that sometimes you don't have that luxury to be like, well, let's just take a break or well, oh, look, there's something there, let's get that right. But I felt like I really enjoyed working that way because it just allows you to just be a little bit more creative, and there's not so much pressure, right, that you have to get this thing, you have to get this coverage.
And how long was the editing process for you? Were you
Oh,
were you
wow.
editing during during that period of time over the time that you were shooting it? Were you sort of editing as well a little bit, or
Mm,
did you wait until
I,
the very end?
we wait. I mean, I was editing a little bit myself, just putting together samples for grants and stuff. But then once we really finished production, I mean, I went back with when my grandfather got sick and filmed myself. But at that point, I then brought on Isidore and we worked with all the material that we had then. So we weren't editing at the same time. And I frankly couldn't afford that either, just with the funding and the way I was um, getting the funding through grants. It wasn't something I could do all at the same time. We were at certain points, but it's sort of a blur now because we edited during the pandemic and Isidore and I, Isidore and I were remote. So for, I think it was maybe we worked together 2 years. It was just a while because things happen sort of in
Mm.
fragments and because of funding, but also when the pandemic hit, I mean, that was, yeah, we were editing most of that time remotely.
There's a long process to go through. Like for you, was it just like you'd work for a couple? of days or weeks and then take a break from it, or was it just continuous? So was there a point where you're just like,
I,
I
yeah,
let's just put this down. I'll come back to it in 2 months. Like,
yeah. I mean, sometimes, yeah, we would take like a month off, but I think there was a point where before I had anybody on board, before I mean, I produced this for most of the time, and then I met uh, my amazing producer, Emma Miller, who Isidore introduced me to, and she came on board like at the rough cut stage, but that was so immensely helpful. But there was moments before that where I would look at this footage and I'd say, I do not know what I'm going to do with this, and feeling really almost down because I didn't know where to go and how to move forward. I had all this footage and but didn't have, first of all, the funding, but also just I was working other jobs. Like I never did this full time, and just saying, okay, it was almost like this itch that you can't scratch, and knowing that I had to finish this film one way or another was going to happen. But then slowly through funding and getting support, I was able to bring people on board and bring like Isidore on board and Emma, and that really helped. I think, the film is only it is good. What's that expression, as the team, right, that built it. Like the team is also what makes
mm,
any project a success. I feel it's not just the director. And I feel with the team that I have, we just really were able to work together and shape the film to what it is now. But I didn't do it just myself. It took a little village, And I'm sure, I mean, was that
yeah, no,
experience
for
with you
sure.
as well? Like, especially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our editing process was not nearly as long. I think it was about
Okay.
3.5 months of just really
Oh, wow.
intense
Yeah.
everyday editing. But it's really funny because, myself and Bon, we are the kind of people who would probably work 20 hours a day and just like edit ourselves into the floor. So it was great to have Sean there because Sean is very deliberate and had us on a schedule. We start at 10, we'd finish at 7. Um, he actually wants to have dinner with his family. And so it was very great because we had a very set schedule and we are able to sort of step away from it and go and be by ourselves and think about what we've done and then come back to it. So it was intense, but it was also very, very healthy um, of a process. But one of the things um, that your grandfather talks about in the film that I find so beautiful, makes you want to sit with him just even longer, is his acceptance, his idea of acceptance, acceptance of life, acceptance of time, acceptance of death. It's so beautiful, and as filmmakers, it's always sort of like, when do you finding that acceptance in our work of when we let go of it, when we finally say, okay, it's done. Um, how did you come to that point, or what is it that allows you to come to that point, whether it's for this film or for any of the other previous films that you've done? How do you find that acceptance of saying, okay, I'm at this place.
It's done.
Let's let it
Yeah.
go.
Let's, that's so hard, right? It's just so hard to do that. I think with this film, I knew that after there was a cut of this film without the voiceover vignettes. And I remember talking to
Mm,
Isidore, and he was like, "Oh, I think we're there. This is the film." But I knew something was missing, and we went back to the edit and really crafted those vignettes. And that's after seeing the film come alive with that, I knew, okay, this is what this is it. This is all I have. This is all I have to say. And so I knew that
mm,
that was a moment that um yeah, I was done. But I don't know. I think it's different on each project. And I don't know if it's an intuitive thing. I think it's a very intuitive thing to know, okay, this is it. Or sometimes it can be practical, right? And you say, I'm done because I want to move on to the next thing, and I feel this is as good as it's gonna get, like, and move forward. So
yeah, the whole
it just
abandonment
depends.
thing, right? You never finish it, you just
Yeah.
abandon.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible to me because I can't imagine without those little voice vignettes. And so did you record them all at once?
We wrote them and then we would record them individually. But I mean, yeah, as a text, right? We would record them, but we did. trial and error with that too, because recording voiceover is it's tricky, and there's certain intonation, and so certain
Yeah.
ways of saying things. So that took a minute to do, but yeah, it was an interesting process. I'd write it, and then my editor and producer, we'd give feedback, and just it was really a collaborative process.
That was incredible. I can't imagine it without, especially the one where you talk about the mountain. That's one that I still think about. With the
Um,
witches, where the witches hide.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think yeah, I love that one too, and it was just a story that always came to mind every time I visit. My grandfather would talk about them, or my aunts and my mom too, and I was always just mesmerized, by that aspect of that folklore. So I thought that this is part of also the experience of being there, is reminded of those childhood memories.
No, it's so incredible. I mean, for you going forward, what is it that are there other things that you want to explore, other themes that you want to do in your work? Do you want to continue to move forward in documentary? Do you want to touch into fiction?
Yeah, I love doc, but I also want to go into fiction. I really, I mean, I started in fiction and did a bit of fiction, but I really want to go back into that and sort of also do hybrids, between doc and fiction, and just explore those formats. But yeah, I really would love to move forward in that direction and do even like TV directing or something. So that would be really cool. Um, yeah, what about you? Are you interested in doc, or are you just
I've
solely
I've
like,
I've tried
yeah?
it a few times. I love docs, but I have such an appreciation for it because, like you just mentioned, you were shooting for 7 years. That level of patience,
Yeah.
I feel like my urgent Scorpio self is just like wants to get everything done, yesterday. So having that patience to be with the story for so long and push it through, um, with that sort of intensity, is something I always appreciate about docs. But I have such a great respect for documentaries when they're done well, because I do feel like it's such a different muscle, a different craft to this whole filmmaking process that we do, that is so requires such a patience and such a dedication to it, and not just dedication, but also um, just this exploration that and letting go that doesn't always happen in fiction. In fiction, I feel like there's always this fight to hold on and to make it into something. Um, Whereas in documentary, you have to be a little bit more open.
For sure. Yeah, I like totally agree with that.
This has been awesome, though. Thank you so much, Iliana,
Yeah, yeah,
for
this has
coming
been
on.
so yeah, thanks, and thanks, I'm excited to see what you do next, and yeah, let me know if you're ever in Austin. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
I, I've never been to Texas, but I've heard
Okay.
great things about Austin.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and thanks again for this great conversation. And I look forward to seeing what comes next, of your work too. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much. And What We Leave Behind from Iliana Sosa is available right now on Netflix in Canada, US, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. So hopefully everyone goes and checks it out and gets to experience this very, very beautiful, haunting, um, poetic portrait of your grandfather.